The Sunday school lesson for September the 8th, 2024 is Daniel's friends refuse to bow. Daniel chapter 3, verse 1 and verses 8 through 18. Welcome, viewers and subscribers, to my channel, Read With Me. I am Audrey. This is an audio reading of the lesson. The Golden Idol, Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. This week, we jump ahead roughly 18 years from when Daniel and his friends were first taken to Babylon. They proved themselves faithful when the stakes seemed low by refusing to eat food that would defile them. But the cost for obedience would get much higher. They had been given Babylonian names: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel chapter 1, verses 6 through 7. Because of their integrity, intelligence, and Daniel's ability to interpret the king's enigmatic dream, Daniel chapter 2, these four men rose high in the Babylonian administrative system. King Nebuchadnezzar was one of the greatest rulers the ancient Near East had seen in centuries. A brilliant and ruthless military commander, he transformed Babylon into the most feared, powerful, and dominant empire in the region. Nebuchadnezzar had great respect for Daniel and his compatriots, but he had even greater esteem for his own majesty and was given to grandiose, self-adulatory promotions. Thus, he received a plan to reflect glory back on himself. Daniel chapter 3, verse 1 tells us that the king made an image of gold, a colossal golden statue measuring 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. Did this image depict one of the Babylonian gods, the chief one being Marduk, or perhaps Nebuchadnezzar himself? We cannot say for certain, but it was clearly an idolatrous image. According to the king's decree, loud music would be played at the dedication ceremony, to which people from far and wide were summoned. Upon hearing the music, everyone was to fall to the ground and worship the king's golden statue. Verses 2 through 5. It was a loyalty test, and the penalty for not participating was uncompromising: immediate incineration in a blazing furnace. Verse 6. Verse 7 informs us that, not surprisingly, compliance was swift and virtually total. When the music sounded, people of all nationalities and languages bowed low to the ground and worshiped Nebuchadnezzar's golden image. This was a gap in the nearly universal worship. However, three individuals stood out conspicuously from the cowed masses: the scheming informants, Daniel chapter 3, verses 8 through 12. The preliminaries, Daniel chapter 3, verses 8 through 11. It was not long before a gaggle of advisors marched in with some important news for the king. Verse 8 calls these advisors certain Chaldeans. This term, sometimes spelled Chaldees, is used more than 150 times in the Bible, but it meant different things in different eras. Initially, it indicated one of the eminent ethnic groups in the regions of Babylon and Sumer. Genesis chapter 11, verse 28 and verse 31. Within the empire established by Nebuchadnezzar, the term Chaldean seems to have taken on an added and more specific meaning, referring to the learned class of priests, magicians, and astronomers. They rose high as royal advisors and administrators, but they suffered humiliation when they proved unable to tell Nebuchadnezzar the content of his dream, much less interpret. Daniel chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. To have been shown up by Daniel in this regard, verses 47 through 49, no doubt rankled them. These men, who must have been filled with resentment at the favor shown to the young Hebrews and looking for ways to cut them down to size, had found an opportunity. They came into the king's presence and accused the Jews. Chapter 3, verse 8. To set their case on solid footing, the advisors evidently felt they had to repeat to the king the content of his own decree, right down to the full list of instruments used in calling for the worship of the golden image. Verse 10. The advisors also thought it necessary to remind the king of the penalty for failing to answer the orchestral call to worship. Nebuchadnezzar surely had not forgotten this, but they eagerly brought it to his attention. Anyone who did not bow down to worship the image was to be thrown into a burning, fiery furnace. Verse 11. The accusation, Daniel chapter 3, verse 12. Finally, the advisors were ready to tighten the noose. They informed the king that there were a few Jews who had not complied with the king's decree. The malefactors were named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The advisors reminded the king that these were men whom he had placed in high positions of administration over the province of Babylon. The motive for this reminder was no doubt to highlight the ingratitude of these three for their promotions and to emphasize their unworthiness to fill the positions. Instead of showing appreciation to the monarch for the high honor bestowed on them, certainly unwarranted for conquered foreigners, they had defied him. They did not serve the Babylonian king's gods, and they refused to worship his golden image. The decree regarding the golden image had not mentioned anything about serving the other gods of Babylon, but the advisors must have felt that it strengthened their case against the supposedly dishonorable character of the three young Jews. Nebuchadnezzar would not be able to ignore such a flagrant violation of his decree by men who had already spurned the worship of Babylonian gods. The brave young men, Daniel chapter 3, verses 13 through 18. The king's anger and final offer, Daniel chapter 3, verses 13 through 15. As the informants no doubt hoped, Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage at their report and immediately ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought in to answer for their insubordination. They were quickly hauled before the king, and the interrogation began. Nebuchadnezzar may have found it difficult to believe that anyone would dare defy his decree, especially these three whom he had so generously favored. He therefore asked whether the report was true. Had they really refused to serve his gods and to worship the golden image? Without waiting for the answer, the king decided to show his magnanimity once more. All they had to do was bow down one time when they heard the music play again, and all would be well. But if they refused, there would be no further appeal. They would be immediately thrown into the blazing furnace. The king ended with a challenge. What God would be able to rescue them from his power? The faithful men's resolute stand, Daniel chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. The reply of the three men was bold and perhaps a bit cheeky. They told the king, essentially, that they did not owe him an answer in the matter at hand. Then they proceeded to answer the final challenge he had just uttered. Nebuchadnezzar had asked what God could possibly save them from his death sentence. They declared to him unambiguously that the God they served was fully able to rescue them from the blazing furnace. Not only that, but they were also confident he actually would do so. And he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. Verse 17. Such confidence was surely the last thing Nebuchadnezzar expected. Then the three drew their line in the sand. By faith, they expected that God would deliver them. But they informed Nebuchadnezzar that even if he chose not to do so, they would not serve the king's gods or worship his golden statue. After centuries of Israelite compromise with idolatry, here were three men who rejected idolatry in the face of gruesome death. What happened next is well known, and we will cover it in the detail next week. The three men were immediately tied up and thrown into the fiery furnace. But instead of being consumed, they enjoyed the fellowship of a fourth person, probably the pre incarnate Christ himself, all of which was witnessed by an astonished Nebuchadnezzar. At his more humble command, they emerged unscathed from the furnace, bringing honor to themselves and glory to God, who is able to save his people. Thank you so very much for listening. Join me soon for the next Read with Me. Stay safe and may God bless.